cycles of violence. Many episodes of violence have occurred on the island of Sri Lanka over a long period of time. Pre-independence violence. Before independence, there was a surge of Sinhalese Buddhist nationalism against British colonialists, Christians and Muslims. And so there were many incidences of violence, such as the Panadora debate held in 1862 was the climax of the first phase of the Buddhist revivalist movement. Sporadic attacks on Christian churches, dignitaries and ordinary believers were reported since another Panadora debate took place in 1873. In 1883, there was a riot in Kotahena. In 1903, a Catholic church in Anuradhapura was burnt down. Anti-Muslim riots took place in 1915, where Sinhalese mobs attacked Muslim traders and shops. This was partly due to rising Sinhalese nationalism coming into conflict with the traditional Muslim control over much of the business world. Sinhalese nationalists were inspired by figures such as Anagarika Dharmapala, one of the most influential Buddhist revivalists at the turn of the 19th century. Long history of state-sponsored violence inflicted upon the Tamil people of Sri Lanka. The Tamil people of Sri Lanka have been subject to state-sponsored violence, discriminatory policies and acts of genocide since independence from Britain in 1948. To this day, the Tamil people do not have rights, including the right to mourn, freedom of speech, and they live in fear with the presence of the Sri Lankan military in the Tamil north and east of the island. Since independence, 1948 onwards, between independence from Britain in 1948 and 2009, there have been more than 150 recorded massacres. The main perpetrator of these massacres is the Sri Lankan state. Over 170,000 Tamil people were murdered. Sinhala Only Act, 1956. In 1956, the Sinhala Only Act was passed, making Sinhalese the only official language of the country. This left many Tamil people in civil service jobs and senior executive positions jobless and forced them to leave the country. This was a discriminatory policy which directly targeted and affected the Tamil people. Inginiyagala Galoya Massacre, 1956. The Gal Oya massacre was the first organized anti-Tamil pogrom that happened in the Uva province in 1956. Local Sinhalese colonists and employees of the Gal Oya Development Board seized government vehicles and weapons and killed over 150 Tamil people. Anti-Tamil pogrom, 1958. In 1958, the first island-wide anti-Tamil pogrom happened, where 158 to 1,500 Tamil people were killed by Sinhalese mobs. The pogrom lasted from 22nd of May until 29th of May, 1958. Although sporadic disturbances happened even after the declaration of emergency on 27th of May, 1958. Satyagraha, peaceful protests of 1961. Satyagraha is a policy of passive political resistance advocated by Mahatma Gandhi. Satyagraha, peaceful protest of 1961. From February to April 1961, Tamil politicians and civilians across the north and east peacefully protested against the government's Sinhala-only policies. Satyagraha, peaceful protests of 1961. However, they were met with violence from the state police and army. Many peaceful Tamil protesters suffered injuries and were treated in hospital. Fourth World Tamil Conference, 10th of January 1974. The Fourth World Tamil Conference was organized by Father Thaninayagam Adigalar, who was a professor of the Tamil language in Malaysia. Tamil delegates from all over the world, including from Tamil Nadu, India, Malaysia, and Mauritius, attended this conference in Jaffna, Sri Lanka. The event took place in the evening when suddenly Sri Lankan police officers started shooting at Tamil attendees, causing a stampede, and also shot at electric cables which fell on the crowd, electrocuting and killing 9 Tamil people. A further 50 Tamil civilians sustained severe injuries. Anti-Tamil pogrom, 1977. Tamil United Liberation Front, TULF, had a landslide victory and won 18 seats at the 1977 general elections. This was not well received by the Sinhala polity. Violence spread across the island. Sinhalese mobs murdered thousands of Tamil civilians, and many Tamils were burnt alive, raped, and had their homes and businesses looted. The United National Party was in power at that time. Introduction of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, 1979. With the introduction of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, in 1979, there have been many incidences of arbitrary arrest, torture, sexual violence, enforced disappearances, and disposal of dead bodies without inquiry. The Prevention of Terrorism Act is still in use today, with many Tamil political activists, young Tamil men and women being arrested. Burning of the Jaffna Public Library, 1981. Jaffna Public Library was the biggest library in the whole of Asia and was subjected to an arson attack which destroyed everything it once held. Over 97,000 culturally important and irreplaceable Tamil manuscripts were destroyed. The devastated library became a symbol of cultural genocide to the Tamil people. This attack was seen as an assault on the Tamil people's aspirations, the value of learning and traditions of academic achievement. The United National Party was in power at that time. Black July, 1983. Black July, the biggest and most horrific anti-Tamil pogrom, occurred between 24th of July and 30th of July, 1983. 3,000 Tamil people were killed. They were attacked, stripped naked, burnt alive, beaten and hacked to death, and Tamil women were raped and killed by Sinhalese mobs. Black July, 1983. Over 8,000 Tamil-owned businesses and homes were looted and burnt down. Black July, 1983. Buses and cars were surrounded and stopped by Sinhalese mobs. They would identify which passengers were Tamil, then proceed to murder those Tamil people by dragging them out of the vehicle, killing or dousing them in petrol, and burning them alive or hacking them to death. The photo on the right shows Sinhalese people looting items from a property. Black July, 1983. Over 150,000 Tamil people became displaced. This anti-Tamil pogrom caused the mass exodus of thousands of Tamil people who sought refuge in foreign countries, contributing to the beginnings of the large Tamil diaspora that exists today. To this day, none of the perpetrators have been brought to justice. The United National Party was in power at that time. Udumbangulam Massacre. On 19th of February 1985, Udumbangulam Massacre occurred where 85 Sri Lankan military personnel from Ambari military camp arrived in 6 military vehicles in Thangavelayudapuram and Udumbangulam villages. They rounded up 103 Tamil people and took them to a forest nearby. The Sri Lankan military personnel raped Tamil women there and cut their breasts off, killing them. The other Tamil farmers were lined up and shot dead. The Sri Lankan military personnel spread harvested hay over the corpses and set them alight. Udambankulam Massacre. This is a list of available names of the victims of the Udambankulam Massacre. Massacres that occurred between 1984 to 1986. The following list shows massacres that took place between 1984 and 1986. Kokkattichole Massacre, 1987. On 28th of January 1987, the Kokkattichole Massacre occurred. The Sri Lankan military began its attack on the village, which lasted for 3 days. They entered the village from various camps in military trucks and helicopters. More than 200 Tamil people aged from 14 to 40 were rounded up and killed. There was a prawn farm that operated in Mahiladithivu with aid from the United States of America. 135 Tamil workers from this prawn farm were among those killed. The military shot dead 24 Tamil people who took refuge in the Kokkadichole rice mill. 7 of those killed were 12-year-olds. Other massacres that occurred in 1987 include the Pattithidal Massacre, Thonithittamadu Massacre, and Alvai Temple Shelling Massacre. Massacres that occurred between 1990 to 1995. The following list shows massacres that took place between 1990 and 1995. Kokkadichole Massacre, 1991. On 12th of June 1991, the people of Kokkadichole suffered through a second massacre at the hands of the Sri Lankan army. The military entered a rice grinding mill and burnt the mill together with 17 Tamil workers inside. 400 Tamil homes were ransacked that day. More than 220 Tamil people were killed. The Sri Lankan army used tires to burn their bodies. Navali Church Massacre. On 9th of July 1995, the Sri Lankan military ordered Tamil people to take refuge in churches and temples. About 2,500 Tamil people followed the military's order, left their homes and took refuge in St. Peter's Church in Navali, Jaffna. 8 rocket bombs were dropped on St. Peter's Church and its surroundings. 155 bodies of Tamil civilians were recovered and 250 Tamil people were seriously injured. Chammani, 1996. Mass graves were found at the Chammani military checkpoint. As many as 600 Tamil civilians went missing after being arrested by the military at this location. Sri Lankan soldiers killed the Tamil victims and buried their bodies in mass graves. In 1998, the Sri Lankan Human Rights Commission began inquiring into these disappearances, but no one has been found accountable. The suspected army officers live freely and have been promoted. Massacres that occurred between 1996 to 2000. The following list shows massacres that took place between 1996 and 2000. Mirsaville Massacre. As a result of military clashes throughout the Tenmarachi area of Jaffna, many Tamil people became displaced to the Vadamarachi area. The people of Mirsaville village had also been displaced to Karavetti in Vadamarachi and were staying in Navalar Hall. On the 19th of December 2000, 9 Tamil people went back to their village of Mirsaville to collect essential items. All of them were arrested and 8 of them were killed by the Sri Lankan military. One of those arrested managed to escape and returned to Karavetti to tell the fate of the others. The youngest victim was only 5 years old. Cycles of violence.